Hello, everyone. My name is Rob. I am the Director of Events and Marketing at Power to Fly, here with another amazing conversation. And we are talking about pages of possibility, writing words where everyone belongs. And our guest here is Brandon T. Snider, a best-selling author of Supergirl's Family Vacation, the award-winning Dark Knight Manual, the Avengers Infinity War, the Cosmic Quest series, and the Reuben Award winning Rube Goldberg and his Amazing Machine series. Additionally, he's written books featuring Cartoon Network favorites like Adventure Time and Regular Show, Marvel's Spider-Man and Black Panther, plus pop culture icons such as Justice League, Star Wars, and The Muppets. And he also writes a ton of Mad Libs. You don't even think of someone writing Mad Libs, but this is the person who does it. And his next middle grade series, Monster Middle School, drops in 2027 from Disney Publishing. Brandon, welcome to Power to Fly.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, my first question, because I just was mentioning some of the amazing array of things that you've written. It's Batman, it's Mad Libs, it's Rube Goldberg machines. Is there a through line in your storytelling philosophy that connects all these really wildly different projects?
Well, I think for one thing, I moved to New York to be an actor. And that was many years ago. And when I moved here, there weren't a ton of it's hard to be an actor. And so
I went to
creatively,
NYU, but then I
okay,
wanted to be an actor, and right away I was like, this auditioning is not, this is not for me.
don't even get me started on auditioning, creatively, I had all this juice, and there came a time when I was like, what I need to put this into something, and that's when my writing sort of like became, the outlet for all that creativity, and I feel like my acting background helps me enter these worlds,
Mhm.
and I feel like I've created, a career for myself where editors know that I can sort of jump in head first and sort of absorb and get into the heads of these characters, in part because I think of my acting background and the way that I look at characters and story and all these things. But yeah, I like a challenge. There have definitely been worlds that I know inside and out, DC, Marvel. Like I grew up with these things, but I do love when an editor comes to me and is like, I don't even know what this is. Okay. We're making books about this thing that somebody's trying to make it pop. And so then I just consume. Actually, funny story. Many years ago, I was asked to do my first My Little Pony book, and it was like a tight deadline. Same time, I had to go to the Jersey Shore for a bachelor party weekend, and so in between all of these events, I was in my room watching 5 episodes of My Little Pony at the time. But I got into I really liked being able to get into the character's head and then turn out something where people have no idea that I like really just sort of like crammed it all in there. But I like that challenge. I think it
Mm.
keeps me on my toes as a writer to try to do, to get in there and distill the essence of the thing that makes this an exciting, world to readers and make
Yeah,
it
I
happen.
love that. And I feel like it's kind of a cliche, but I always say to people, there is like a power in doing an improv class or a public speaking class or an acting
Absolutely.
class if that's not the world you're in, but just the ability to speak publicly or to have storytelling or get into the mindset of maybe even like your client or your customer or something like that. I do think it's like super valuable. And I think it's one of the things that has made me successful over the years is having that background there.
Absolutely. When I took my improv classes years ago, like most people have the story of like, oh, I took my class and then my class and I formed a group and then we went.
Yes.
No one in my class was actually a performer. They were all just like regular people who were like,
Hmm.
one guy was a newscaster from DC that would take the train in and just wanted to be a little bit looser on camera. There was a bank teller. Like everybody was just like, I want to be more comfortable speaking in front of people. And so like, yeah, it's a great tool, improv, and it can like also just help you navigate the world better.
It can. It can. Yeah, yes. And as an LGBTQ author working largely within like these major IP franchises, how do you bring that authentic voice and perspective into stories that aren't originally yours to define?
I mean, I have always been a funny kid. I've always had a sense of humor. And so I feel like my voice and my specific humor and the way that I tell stories, um, that's how I do that. You know what I mean? Like I my editors are hiring me for a reason. They like my work. And so I like to inject my own thing into these worlds. You know, I'm not going to go overboard. I know the worlds that I'm working in, and I feel like I've been doing it long enough that I know where I can push a little bit and where, I can have some leeway. And there have been times too where, y- you know, working in big franchise stuff can be overwhelming.
Hmm.
If you're working, I've worked in books that tie into the MCU. I've worked in, other things for DC. Um, but as long as I'm bringing my honest voice to things, I feel like that's the best thing that I can do. Um, even just the thing that I'm turning in today for DC, like a couple episodes of a thing that hasn't been um, announced yet. I'm looking at some of the jokes and I'm looking at some of the lighter moments, and I'm like, I don't think that these are like crazy pushing these characters, but there's definitely something slightly different about it that's like distinctly me, but it makes sense for the characters. But
Yeah.
so there's like finding that balance where I'm like, yeah, like we're gonna have a little fun, and my queerness, my voice is present in this work. And I think if you are an LGBTQ person, there's a chance that when you read this, you might be like, "Mm, I know about this guy. I know about this writer." You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, totally. And I think I would imagine on some level there's a fun challenge in finding that voice within something that has these, you're playing in someone else's sandbox too. I always
Correct.
think like sometimes I hear writers working on TV that are working in classic 22-minute episodes, and everything has to be just right versus like
Hmm.
if you're writing for a streaming show and it can be an hour and 15 minutes or something like that. Like there's can maybe be more indulgences there sometimes than it's like,
Yeah,
okay, it has to fit in this, but I still have to get my point across.
absolutely. And I feel like too, like there's a pacing sometimes,
Mhm.
with jokes, a setup and punch, a bit of cleverness that, you know, might be a stretch for some of the characters, but like when I try to put it through my filter and into it, it's sort of like I think I can convince editors to be like, yeah, that makes sense. That works.
Mhm.
In Supergirl's Family Vacation, we got off a couple of jokes like that where we have Superman behaving slightly out of character for story reasons that will become apparent. But he in because of those things, he gets to be a little bit more saucy. He gets to be a little bit more naughty. And it makes sense and it's like entertaining, and it endears the reader to him
Oh,
overall.
we all love naughty Superman. So,
I
and then,
likewise.
and it's kind of speaking about authentic voice ties into what I wanted to ask you kind of in this age of AI, what makes writing by an actual human more important now than ever, or at least what sets that apart from something that is AI generated, which obviously we're seeing more and more of.
Well, AI is hollow. AI doesn't have the experience. AI doesn't understand the nuances of joy or pain or suffering or happiness. It doesn't understand any of that because it hasn't gone through it. It is not real. And so I don't, I think that there are uses for AI in the medical space. I know people that have, that's like, but like when it comes to generative AI in writing, I, I, I don't, I don't understand how somebody that values the writing process
Mhm.
would devalue their own work by working with AI. Now, let me tell you, when I'm pitching a story, I would love to be able to put my pitches into AI and to get them tight because pitching a story, where it's like I want
Sure.
1 page, but I don't because I'm feeding that beast.
Yeah.
And it also, when it comes from a cognitive level, from a development level, I don't want to lose that skill set because people are already saying, once you start using AI for certain things, there are certain skill sets and certain cognitive things that immediately start deteriorating because you're now relying on this specific thing. Um,
Mhm.
so I do think AI is very hollow. I do think AI will never be able to fully mimic the depth of the human experience. And that's what, when we read books, when we read graphic novels, when we see television, when we see movies, we are looking for that nuance. We are looking for that depth. We are looking for the uniquely interesting things that make us go like, oh, I didn't think that. I thought that I was the only one that felt that way or saw that thing. And I
Mhm.
don't think that AI can recreate that.
Yeah, I think that's those are all great points. And I think like there's such a big difference between the work you're doing and, maybe if you're sending out an email trying to get people to buy shoes or something like that. Like
Right.
you're tapping into that human experience and it's not like a plug and play thing in that way. So I think, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I also kind of wanted to ask too about like representation because what does this representation mean to you in practice? Not just having LGBTQ plus characters on the page, but actually writing them in a way that feels true. I feel like
Right.
DC, as a comic book fan, has done that actually really well over the last few years. But like, it's one thing just to have the character in there, but I think it's a whole nother thing to give that character like a proper life and a three dimension to that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, yes, you want something to ring true. Um, and, characters are on journeys. It's probably not the first time I'm going to say the word journey in this, but like, so like we want to see growth and mistakes will need to be made, and so when you're crafting a story you want to be truthful, but and you also want to be truthful to like the kind of mistakes that get made and the messiness of life. And when you're dealing with certain characters in certain worlds, you may or may not have the opportunity to fully explore everything on the timeline and given the space that you really want to do that. um, but like, I want to see messy characters. I want to see characters making mistakes. I want to see them get from A to B in a way that makes sense, that doesn't just, isn't just cleaned up neatly where it's, very sanitized. Because I know, I came out when I was 35. And I wasn't a deeply closeted person, but I had a lot of trauma from my youth that made me uh, fearful of men. And my experiences once I came out and my whole world opened up, I could look back on some of the messier things of my youth and sort of understand all the things that shaped me. And I think that so representation, like you said, it isn't just about having LGBTQ characters, it's about showing the breadth of their experiences that informed them and got them to the point where they are now. Now, do I think that like, is it important to have trans people writing trans characters? Absolutely. Is it important to have people writing about these experiences that they have gone through? Absolutely. And I think that like, we want to see something that's well-rounded. We want to be left with a fuller understanding of someone's experience and also be entertained as well.
Hmm.
It doesn't always have to be, a very special episode where we're finally getting to, no, like, yeah, I want to laugh with gay characters and trans characters and all of these things and just be able, because we all just want to exist. And so I don't want to put the pressure for every writer, LGBTQ writer, to represent the thing that they are at all times, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's
Yeah, I think
important.
I had an aversion to somewhat to some like LGBTQ media for a long time just
Mm,
because so many of the stories were so dark. Like, and you're getting into this, it's like,
right,
oh, maybe it's gonna start happy, but it's gonna end horribly. Like, and
right.
then now I think we are at a point where that's no longer the case. And I feel like
Yes.
I have embraced so much more queer media because I'm not gonna just see like this awful, horrible story, or someone being tortured or whatever it is. Like, I'm gonna see the joy and the light and the messiness that comes in that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And like we don't need to be pigeonholing each other, right? Like we really need to be, letting each other tell our stories, however they sort of, come out.
Yeah, yeah. And so what's interesting is like your work has spanned, all different kind of age levels, and then your upcoming series, Monster Middle School, that's aimed, I think, at a younger audience. So what's the responsibility or the opportunity really in shaping stories that kids encounter during the years when they're really figuring out who they are? Maybe in terms of an LGBTQ thing, but maybe just in general, like they're shaping their experience. Do you feel a responsibility? Is there an opportunity there?
Oh, absolutely. And Monster Middle School is a middle grade novel series. Rube Goldberg and His Amazing Machines was a middle grade novel series.
Okay.
And in Rube, we had Rube's best friend that came out in the second book. And we had a trans character that sort of was like the person that made him feel comfortable enough. Like, he was sort of afraid to talk to Rube and his friends about this thing, but then he communes with this trans character who makes him feel safe and makes him go, oh, you know what? Like, it's okay. And with Monster Middle School, these are characters they come together in a way where they are not necessarily, they did not choose to be friends. They've come together and they've been given a mission and they butt heads and there's friction between them. Um, and again, what you sort of said, middle school is this like crazy time where kids are just like emotional. And so I like high emotion in those things. I like a little bit of sassiness. I like, in Monster Middle School, these are kids that give it to each other when they get heated, they're going at each other. And ultimately, they will take a step back and we'll be able to sort of see more of where they're coming from. Um, and also understand that in book one and in book two, to see the experiences that shaped them and to then go, oh, I didn't know you were going through that.
Hmm.
So now I understand why you're a dick. You know what I mean? Like that sort of thing. And I think that's really important. And also, again, with the journey, we have two books for Monster Middle School to start. Hopefully we do more. But like there's a lot to explore about these kids. Middle school is just the beginning.
Yeah.
And I also think that sometimes, yeah, you don't, when you're on a journey, you've got a long way to go. And so I'm hoping that with those characters in particular, that I can write them for a long time and we can see them grow and change and
Mhm.
blossom in ways
And,
that will.
and do you yourself, or do you work with an editor to like make sure that you're writing for the middle school audience? Do you ever go, "Oh, this sounds too adult," or actually, or even the opposite, like this sounds too kiddie? Like a middle school is my husband's a middle school principal, so
Oh
I
my
know middle
gosh,
school is so, you don't
it's a
want to be
lot.
seen as a kid, but you're obviously certainly not an adult either.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have a really great editor, especially on Monster Middle School, Regan Winter. And, we can have really frank conversations about like what I want to do and what she thinks works and what we think also from a larger perspective will be welcomed, because it is a Disney series. And so, excuse me, like she's been great about letting me tell my story. But we do have conversations about what works and what doesn't, and how far to take certain things. And we've been on the same page a lot, which I'm very lucky for. And I also feel very lucky. We've worked together for years. And when she was at another, she actually, I was the first person that ever thanked her in the back of a book when we worked
Oh
on
my
the
gosh.
Avengers Infinity War Cosmic Quest, where she was like, it was like one of her first jobs out of college. And now she's an editor, at Disney, and we get to work together in this capacity. So it's been really nice. But we have a really great dialogue about all of these things, and sort of understanding how far to push. And Disney and DC as well, they have departments like once the manuscript is created that can come in and sort of say, these things are a little high for the reading level. These things might not be, just to give you an idea of where it sits. Because the readership, especially with COVID, we've seen like reading habits change in kids and reading levels change and developmentally. So I want them to have something that is accessible, but that also gives them a little bit of challenge, so that they're
Hmm.
not just, so that they can, whether that is like a bit of a complex story or just like vocabulary. I liked a book that had a word that I didn't know what it was so
Yeah.
that I could look it up or ask my mom about it. And I think that's part of the reading experience.
Yeah, I love that. And I think even though we're talking about like narrative storytelling here, I think so much of this applies if you're on the more corporate side, what is your voice? Like how funny do you want it to be? How dry do you want it to be? Who is your
Yes.
audience? Keeping all those things in mind, I think it is so key to
Yes.
storytelling and to marketing or what have you.
And I like to get people, I like to use humor to get people into it, right? I
Hmm.
feel like if I can make people laugh and start to understand these characters, then later on they'll trust me so that by the time, I do something to their favorite character, they're like, "Oh my God." Like they feel something because I was able to sort of lead them along this like very nice path and then do the thing that I like to do, which is affect young readers and
Yeah.
have them think and feel things.
I love that. And well, I'll toot your horn here because you've won awards. You've hit the bestseller list. You've written some of the biggest franchises on the planet, literally. So, what piece of storytelling advice you did you have to unlearn to get where you are today?
As a younger author, I thought that everything I wrote was gold. I mean, like most more so like in high school and college, where like yeah, I thought the process was you write and then you deliver, right? Which it might have been in high school and college for me writing papers. You know what I mean? You don't have a ton of time and energy and space to revise and whatever. You're just sort of like processing and turning it out. But when it comes to stories, when it comes to like, you know, um, I'm going through drafts. I'm constantly looking for ways to improve upon, to tighten up. If I know the story that I want to write, if I know what I want these characters' journey to be, I keep constantly going back and being like, am I doing this efficiently? Have I added all the elements that I want? Have I built this world? And so part of that is just not being precious about the things that you're writing.
Mhm.
Like sometimes you got to lose a good line. Sometimes you got to lose a good scene. Um, and sometimes you find ways to work around those things. But you can't, especially when working in these worlds, you can't dig your heels in too much because somebody is going to come along and be like, yeah, we don't have space. We don't have time. We can't, we need to get right to these characters on this planet.
Mhm.
So we don't have time for them to walk around and make jokes. And you can't, you're not going to win battles sometimes. So you can't be too precious about your words.
I love that. And I think, again, something like that can translate to so many other things, whether you're working on a certain project or a
Hmm.
product and you've put all this time into it, but then at the end of the day, it doesn't work or no one's buying it. Sometimes you have to walk away and say, you know what? I know that was a lot of my time, but
Hmm.
it's not working. I'm going to go focus on something else.
Absolutely. And I can tell you when it comes to graphic novels and comic books, I like dialogue. I like writing dialogue. I for Supergirl's Family Vacation, because of the format, it's a bit smaller. There's not the same amount of room as a regular comic
Mm.
book. So I remember when my editor, like I turned in that first draft and she's like, just to let you know, things will need to be cut, but it's fine now. And I had to, I really upgraded, I think, during that process because I had to go through and be like, oh my God, but I really want them to say all of these words in this, but I had to like go through and really streamline and get to the core of what was happening in each scene and not have, you know, any conversation that could have been, extraneous or whatever. Um, but I think it's a good, I was happy to have upgraded my skill set at that moment.
Yeah, I love that. And before I let you go, kind of question for aspiring writers, especially maybe LGBTQ writers, or really any kind of LGBTQ professional out there who feel like they might have to sand down their edges to break into publishing or break into business or whatever it might be, especially maybe at this time when so many LGBTQ rights are under attack. What would you tell those people that feel like they need to maybe make themselves smaller or sand down those edges at this time?
I think. I don't think you need to sand down your edges. I think you need to be a tight storyteller. I think you need to be able to communicate your story effectively. I don't like to shy away from dark things. I don't like to I like to house them in humor. That's how I get them in. Um, but I don't think that y their reality is about the business, about publishing, about entertainment, and some of them are realities that I dislike. Um, but I don't think going into it, I think going in, if you know the story you want to tell and you try to communicate it effectively, that's the best thing that you can do. Um,
Mhm.
and so going in being like, what am I going to have to compromise on? What am I going to have to sand down? I think will take you out of the game a little bit because now you're already, and it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you can't think that, because I definitely have known going in with certain stories like, they might say no to this, but I'm prepared to pivot or I'm prepared to adjust XYZ. And it's a different writing for like characters that are established or doing your own thing. If you're doing your own
Sure.
thing, you're in charge of that. I've had stories that I want to do, that I've had the reaction being like, I don't know that this is marketable. I have a queer story that I really want to tell that's a little bit dark and a little bit humorous, but it sits in a weird, not quite YA, not quite middle grade. Um, and so then I have to take a step back and be like, do I make this lighter so it can be middle grade, or do I lean into these other elements to make it YA? And I'll figure that out. But I think if you know what you're doing story wise, right? If you're really behind the crafting of the story, that's the most important thing. And you
Yeah.
shouldn't sand down your edges, if somebody comes in and if your story is a queer story and somebody wants you to remove the queerness, or that's a totally different thing, and
Mhm.
you shouldn't really do that. And I think somebody that would ask you to do that um, is not somebody you want to work
Probably
for
not who you
anyway.
want to work with.
Yeah,
And of course, everything is not marketable until it's marketable, until there's a heart
right.
stopper or a heated rivalry. How many of those kind of stories were pitched and it's like no one wants to buy that, and then they become the biggest things on the planet.
Exactly. Exactly. And then your heated rivalry gets greenlit and people are like, look at this, it's so derivative. And you're like, I was here
Exactly.
first.
Yes. Yes, I have yes, I've know that firsthand. Well, before we let you go, Brandon, where can people follow you, learn more about your work, and obviously, especially keep updated with Monster Middle School when it comes out next year?
Yeah, so I'm at Brandon T. Snider, Snider, on social media. I'm on Blue Sky and Instagram. I'm doing a lot of Comic Cons this summer. I'm going to Allentown this weekend, then North Carolina the next weekend. I'll be at San Diego. So you can find information on social media, on my schedule there. I'm also at cootiekid.com, COOTIEKID.com. It was a name that I was called as a young man by my lovely classmates when who were a real piece of work. But I took it and I made it into something strong. But yeah, that has information about all the things that I will have coming out and then all the places that I'll be appearing. And then, yeah, and Monster
Amazing.
Middle School will be out next summer. And I think we'll probably have a cover and more details about that in the fall.
Great. Well, fall, perfect time for monsters.
Absolutely.
Halloween. So, thank you so much, Brandon, and stay tuned for more conversations here at Power to Fly.
Thanks for having me.